The wind cut across the plains that morning with a sharpness that carried the bite of early autumn. Dust rolled in lazy spirals, catching on the fence posts and the tired heads of cattle scattered across the open range. Ezekiel Boone, known simply as Zeke, to most stood on the porch of his small ranch house, one hand braced against the beam, the other clutching the brim of his weather-beaten hat. It wasn't much to look at: creased, scarred, a dark felt that had seen its share of storms, saloon brawls, and blood, but to Zeke it was more than fabric and leather. It was the last thing his father had handed him before riding out on the trail from which he never returned. That hat wasn't for sale. Not now, not ever. But men had come asking. 3 riders pushed their way up the dirt path toward the house, their silhouettes hard against the rising Sunday. They weren't neighbors. Zeke knew that immediately. Their posture, their silence, the way their hands hovered just close enough to their gun belts, this was no friendly visit. The lead rider, tall and stiff-backed, dismounted first. He looked out of place in the dust of the frontier, his coat too fine, his boots too polished. He tipped his head at Zeke and forced a smile. "Morning, Boone," the man drawled. "Name's Maddox, Sterling Maddox. You've got something of mine." Zeke's jaw tightened. "Don't reckon I do." Maddox's eyes slid to the hat on Zeke's head. "That there. I've been looking for it a long time. Name your price." The silence stretched. Zeke's heart beat steady, though his hand drifted closer to the revolver resting on his hip. "Ain't for sale." Maddox chuckled softly, but his men shifted uneasily. "Everything's for sale, Boone. Don't make this difficult." "This hat's mine," Zeke said, his voice like gravel. "And it stays that way." The tension rippled like a coiled rattlesnake ready to strike. Maddox studied him for a long moment, his polite smile curdling into something colder. "You don't understand what you're refusing. That hat belonged to Judge Harlan Boone, your father. He dealt in more than cattle, didn't he? There's a reason men like me are interested in it. You're sitting on something bigger than you know." Zeke's chest tightened at the mention of his father, but his stance never wavered. "I don't care if it belonged to the devil himself. It's mine now." For the first time, Maddox dropped the veneer of civility. His voice hardened. "You're making a mistake you won't live to regret." Zeke tipped the hat lower over his brow. "Then you'll just have to test that." The men lingered long enough to make the message clear, then mounted up and rode back toward town. Dust clouded the horizon, but Zeke knew that wouldn't be the end of it. That night, unease settled over the ranch like a sickness. The cattle grew restless, spooked by shapes that prowled at the edge of the pasture. The lanterns inside burned low, and Zeke sat at the table with his rifle across his knees. He wasn't sure what Maddox wanted with the hat, or why it seemed worth more than land or cattle, but he knew men like that didn't ask twice without bringing fire and lead the second time. And when the first gunshot cracked through the night, Zeke realized the storm had arrived sooner than he expected. The first bullet shattered the glass of the front window, spraying shards across the table where Zeke had been sitting moments before. He rolled to the floor, heart pounding, and reached for the lamp to douse the light. The ranch house plunged into darkness. Outside, he could hear the thunder of hooves and the harsh laughter of men circling like wolves. He crawled to the door, rifle in hand, and waited. The wood creaked with his every movement, but he forced himself still, steadying his breath. Another shot rang out, splintering the porch beam. They were testing him, taunting him, trying to flush him into the open. Then came the voice Maddox's smooth, venom-laced tone. "Boone, one last chance. Hand over the hat, and maybe I let you live." Zeke's reply was a gunshot that tore through the night and dropped one of Maddox's riders from his saddle. Chaos erupted instantly. Horses screamed, men cursed, and bullets ripped into the walls of the house. Zeke returned fire, but he knew he was outnumbered. Alone, he couldn't hold out until morning. But Zeke had something Maddox didn't count on: neighbors who remembered deaths, and allies who watched from the shadows. By the time the gunfire lulled and Maddox pulled his men back, the ranch was scarred, but Zeke still stood. He leaned against the doorframe, blood seeping from a graze across his arm, hat still firm on his head. Maddox glared at him from across the yard. "You don't know what you've started," Maddox hissed. "That hat holds the key to more than your pride. There's a map stitched in the lining gold, Boone. gold buried deep on tribal land. You think your pa didn't know what he was dealing in? He was sitting on a fortune. That hat's my claim, and I'll bring hell itself to get it. Zeke's gut twisted. His father had died with more secrets than Zeke ever understood. But if Maddox spoke truth, then the hat wasn't just family, it was fire. And fire like that drew everyone. As Maddox retreated, Zeke realized the fight was far from over. By dawn, he'd need to decide run, hide, or fight. But when the first streaks of morning broke across the sky, Zeke wasn't alone anymore. Shapes emerged along the ridgeline, silent as shadows. Warriors, mounted and armed, their presence a wall against the horizon. At their front rode Grey Hawk, a leader Zeke had once shared bread with during a harsh winter, when neither cattle nor game could be found. Grey Hawk dismounted at Zeke's gate, his eyes steady, his voice low but firm. We heard the wolves circle. We saw the fire in the night. You fed one of ours when the world turned its back. Now, we feed your fire. Behind him, nearly 150 warriors sat their horses, faces painted, rifles resting across their laps. Maddox's threat would not fall on one rancher alone. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. Maddox had stirred something far greater than greed. He had awakened a reckoning. Maddox rode back into town furious, his pride wounded deeper than the bullet that had clipped his shoulder. He stormed into the saloon, men scattering at the sight of his face. He gathered every outlaw, every drifter, every gun for hire desperate enough to take coin. Words spread like fire. Boone had the key to gold, and Maddox would pay handsomely to anyone who pried it from his head. By sundown, an army of desperate men was on the move. Back at the ranch, Zeke stood among his unexpected allies. The warriors moved like a living wall, their discipline stark against the chaos Maddox commanded. Greyhawk's voice carried over the wind. They will come at dusk. They will come hard. But we will not move. Zeke's hands tightened on his rifle. He glanced at the hat creased, scarred, ordinary to the eye, but heavy now with the weight of legacy and blood. I didn't ask for this, he muttered. Greyhawk's gaze was steady. None of us do. But we answer when it comes. The sky burned red as Maddox's riders crested the horizon, a swarm of dust and steel. Gunfire cracked first, wild and hungry, but the warriors answered with precision. The ground shook with a charge, and the ranch became a battleground. Zeke fought shoulder to shoulder with men who owed him nothing, their bond forged not by gold but by honor. Bullets sang through the air, horses screamed, men fell. Yet the warriors held, their unity breaking Maddox's horde apart piece by piece. Amid the chaos, Zeke caught sight of Maddox himself, pressing forward like a man possessed. Their eyes met across the firestorm, and Zeke knew the fight would end only one way. He moved through the smoke and fury, rifle discarded for the weight of his revolver. They met at the fence line, steel flashing, words lost to the roar of battle. Maddox lunged, desperate, clawing for the hat. It's mine, he snarled. Zeke's answer was a single, final shot that echoed across the plain. Maddox fell, dust rising around him, eyes wide with disbelief. His hand never touched the brim. Silence spread slowly, broken only by the groans of the wounded and the crackle of dying fire. Maddox's men scattered, leaderless, leaving only the fallen behind. Greyhawk raised his rifle high, a cry of victory rolling across the land. The warriors did not cheer for gold. They cheered for defiance for a man who stood firm when wolves came calling. Zeke sank to his knees, the weight of it all pressing heavy. He removed the hat and stared at it, the fabric torn, the lining stained. Inside, just as Maddox had said, threads of stitching formed the outline of a map, riches enough to curse 100 lifetimes. But Zeke struck a match and set the lining aflame. The fire licked and consumed until only ash remained. Some things weren't meant to be owned. Some legacies were meant to die with the men who carried them. Greyhawk's hand rested on his shoulder. You chose well. Zeke placed the ruined hat back on his head. I chose peace. The warriors departed at dawn, silent as they had come, leaving the ranch scarred but standing. Zeke watched them fade into the horizon, gratitude burning in his chest. The land was quiet again, but he knew its memory would not fade. One man's refusal had turned greed into war, but also into loyalty. A simple act, a single stand, had called 150 warriors to his side. And, in the silence that followed, Zeke understood the truth. Sometimes the smallest choices, the stubborn refusals, shape everything. If this story gripped you, if you felt the weight of loyalty, betrayal, and the power of standing firm against the wolves, don't let it end here. Share it with someone who loves tales of the untamed frontier. Subscribe for more stories where the smallest acts ignite the fiercest battles. And remember, sometimes a man's worth is measured not by what he sells, but by what he refuses to give away.